Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about True Detective Night Country Episode 1, and it's just called Part 1. Seems to be a simple title scheme for this one. So this is technically Season 4 of True Detective, although they've all been very standalone stories, and this is no different. So I guess I'll start kind of spoiler-free, just give some impressions first before I get into anything that is more spoilery. I should probably set up where I'm coming from with this one. My feelings going into this, because they were kind of, I don't know, lukewarm, I guess, but hopeful, maybe. I think I have a kind of a mixed history with True Detective, more so than I think most people do, in that I do think Season 1's a bit overrated. I think the direction was really good, and obviously the two actors who were in it, the two leads, were really great, and I think that did a lot of the heavy lifting, but I always thought the writing was kind of rough. I never thought the writing was good in Season 1, so I wasn't as, praising it as much as everyone else was at the time. I still watched it all, I still enjoyed it, but I wasn't putting it on the pedestal that other people were a decade ago, actually, because I noticed it was 2014 when that aired. Season 2 was terrible, it was just garbage. I somehow saw the whole thing, and everyone seemed to mostly agree that it was trash. No one really cared about it. Season 3, I only watched the first episode. It seemed better than 2, but nothing that made me want to kind of keep watching it. I think over the last 6, 7, 8 years, I've gotten a lot more picky and just knowing when to opt out of things that I don't think I'm going to really enjoy spending my time on. And I think that's just how I felt with True Detective Season 3. Even though it was probably objectively better than 2, it wasn't good enough to make me want to keep watching it. So, one of the main things getting into this season was that it was a different creative force behind it. Issa Lopez is the showrunner of this season, writing or co-writing most of the episodes, showrunning, and directing, I think, all the episodes. So, if nothing else, we've got a different voice, because Nick Pizzolatto, or Pizzolatto, however you say his name, who showran the first couple seasons, I just don't think he's a good writer. He never was, right? Season 1 got by in other merits, and it was clearly just missing. Whatever kept Season 1 afloat was just gone for Season 2. So it being a new creative voice, it was interesting at the very least to see how it turned out. Give it a chance and see if the new characters, new ideas were worth doing. Season 4 here comes with Jodie Foster as the lead, and Callie Reese as the second lead. It's set in Alaska. It's funny that I just talked about A Murder at the End of the World over the last couple months, when this is now another show set in a snowy climate. That was Iceland, this is Alaska. We're doing kind of almost the opposite of Insomnia, the Christopher Nolan movie. Although, before the ultra nerds get mad at me, yes, I realised that was a remake of a Scandinavian movie from the 90s, but I mainly know the Christopher Nolan version, which is set in Alaska when it's daytime the whole time, right? The time of the year where the sun's just out 24/7. This is the opposite end of that. This is when the sun is gone, and it's nighttime for months. That's what the set of this is. In terms of atmosphere, that feels like a really good place to set a murder mystery. Something bad's happened. There's been some disappearances, some killings, and we've got detectives. And I think Jodie Foster being cast kind of felt like a big get. It was like, she's most famously known for Silence of the Lambs. She's most famously known for hunting down a serial killer with Hannibal Lecter. It felt like a big deal to get someone with that history onto the show. It felt like probably the biggest type of star casting they could maybe do outside of, I don't know. I mean, what else would you even go to? Maybe like Brad Pitt or Morgan Freeman from Seven, and sort of like bank on that cred a little bit. But it was a big get. Like, as soon as they announced Jodie Foster, it felt like, okay, you're going for something with that casting. I think my feelings on this first episode are a little mixed, in that I think I like the location, I like some of the creepier vibes that it's going for. The basic premise is that a bunch of researchers and scientists go missing early in the episode from a research base, kind of like somewhere like The Thing or something like that. It's not as remote, like, because people drive to it, right? It's not that far out the way, but but it's out in the outskirts, just stuck in the snow, and all these people go missing. We get a little bit of a taste of what its life is like there. We see something creepy, and then next thing we see the police are coming in and looking at the place, and they don't know where anyone is. It's a kind of a complete mystery. There's a little bit of an answer by the end of the episode, but nothing, concrete. So that's very much what the show is revolving around, but there's also a big bit of backstory with a crime that happened 6 months ago, a year ago. I can't remember the exact time frame, but there was a local Native American woman who was murdered in a hate crime. She was an activist, and someone killed her, and our second main character, Callie Reese, plays Navarro. She was a cop who is now in a different department. She's a trooper now, and part of that is because she was causing a lot of trouble because she wouldn't drop the case, because she was determined to find out what happened to her, and maybe going kind of beyond the realm of what everyone else was okay with. Jodie Foster's character, Danvers, is the new captain at the regular police force in this town, which I think is fictional, and she actually came after this crime. She was brought in to run this place afterwards, after that murder. So there's a lot of backstory in this episode set up with that crime and how much these characters either believe or don't believe they can solve the case. Introduces a few other supporting characters, like John Hawkes is in here. It's another big bit of casting. He plays another cop who seems very just apathetic at best, possibly even secretly villainous at worst about his attitude when it comes to all these cases. He seems to not really want to help. Is that because he has something to hide and he has an agenda, or does he just truly not give a shit? Open for interpretation at this point. His son, who's also an adult cop, as opposed to a child cop, you know what I mean? His son has grown up and has a job in the police force, but he's the younger rookie cop. He's there as well. And then there's a few other characters that are connected to some of these main cast. Some of them have kids or siblings or whatever, and that's the broad main characters, I would say. Fiona Shaw from the hit classic Super Mario Brothers live action movie from 1993. She's in here as well as a character who might be seeing something supernatural, and that's something that I'd kind of forgotten True Detective Season 1 had a good dose of, was the implication that there might be supernatural stuff going on. Obviously, I don't think by the end of the show it ever felt like they really confirmed it, and that was an intentional choice. That could be a similar thing here, where they don't really... Maybe things seem supernatural for a bit, but by the end there'll be plausible enough explanations for everything, and maybe just a little hint of... just an open little door that says maybe something supernatural was going on. That said, though, some of the more supernaturally teases in this episode are quite overt. There's a character who straight up thinks they're seeing a ghost, and the ghost does lead them to something, so there's something going on there. Whether you want to read that as just her psychically seeing something and thinking it bears results, or whether I don't know. We'll get into it. So how did I feel about it? I don't know. I'm kind of mixed. I like the setting, like I said. I like the cast by and large. I think I'm a little bit bored of the tropes of this type of show, particularly this type of show on a network like HBO, which is sometimes I feel like they're padding things out because they want that 60-minute runtime, and I feel like they maybe almost at times ignore the actual compelling story they've set up. Because I think the opening 5-10 minutes of this show is really good. The first 5-10 minutes of this episode that sets up the initial mystery is very atmospheric, it's very engaging, it was drawing me in, and I was like, oh, I'm into this. And then it sort of did the really typical cable premium cop show thing, where we then slow down and we just kind of like get introduced to all of the personal lives of all the characters who are involved, and also set up this backstory of this murder with its own little mystery. And I think there's a way to do that, and I understand the logic, because you obviously have to do characterization. You have to set up the characters. You have to care about their personal lives to some extent and what's going on with them. But there's a balance to be had, and there's a way to sort of naturally like integrate those things together that I do feel quite often with these types of shows on HBO, or any similar kind of cable or streaming service that try and do prestige TV, is that there's almost this desire to like give the actors a lot of material to really act, right? These are shows where they get to do these meaty parts, and I almost think that sometimes they dwell in scenes where they get to just act a bit too much at the expense of the pacing or the expense of what we're actually there for. And in this case, like, I'm here for the creepy mystery and investigating the crime, and of course there's some scenes of this of some characters just going and having sex with a love interest, and it really not telling us a whole lot. And I feel like every single show I see on HBO, or I should say every, but a large majority of the shows that I see in HBO or a Showtime or a Stars or even like a Peacock or whatever, I feel like most of them have a scene where one or two of the main characters will go off to someone and we'll find out that they've got a partner, whether it's an actual relationship or an affair or just a casual love interest who they go and have sex with, but there'll be a scene with them having sex just so we can have the trope that we always get at the start of one of these shows. And it's not as gratuitous here, to be fair to it. Like, usually it's an excuse for cheap nudity. Here there wasn't really any nudity, right? Everything was kind of implied, or tops were left on, or whatever, so I'm not even complaining about that. It's more just the trope of this type of introduction we always get on these shows. And I felt like it was kind of going through some of those in this episode with the way it was introducing some of its characters. Navarro, the state trooper who is determined to solve this murder from a year ago or wherever it is, she has that scene in this episode where all of a sudden, halfway or 2/3 into the episode, she goes to a random apartment and cut to her having sex with this character who doesn't seem like he's going to be a big deal in the story. Maybe he will turn out to be a big deal later. Maybe this is important to introduce him. But I feel like I've seen some version of this scene so many times in so many shows like this one that I feel like most of the time it turns out to not be that important, or turns out to be one of the weakest elements of the show. It feels mean to compare anything to The Continental, that John Wick TV show that only got 3 episodes last year. But that had the same thing. The tough, female cop who wanted to like change things and solve crimes and break through barriers. Fine qualities to have in a character, but she had the exact same thing. She had a sex scene where it's showing that she's the dominant one and that she's this tough character. It had the exact same scene, and that relationship she had in that show, which was an affair with a married man, was easily one of the dullest things in the show. I mean, that show was bad overall, don't get me wrong, but I was getting similar vibes with this. It was kind of the same thing. It was, here, she's tough, she's bad, she's the top and not the bottom, if you will. It feels like very much a trite thing to do at this point. And I just kind of felt I felt myself looking at the clock. I was like, okay, how much of this is left? At a certain point in the middle of the episode, we kind of abandoned even talking about the main mystery as we talked about this case from before. And this case from before is clearly going to be very important. And because there's something at the crime scene of the main mystery, it does seem to be connected, right? There's some connection between this murder from before and this mysterious disappearance of all these scientists. So, okay, that seems important, but we go so long in the middle of this episode where we're almost never bringing up the main story. After the first 15 minutes, it feels like until the last 5 minutes, we don't even talk about the main thing that we set up at the start of the episode. And I found that a little bit annoying, a little bit frustrating, and a little bit like we were padding things out by doing, I don't know, just excess character drama where we're seeing more of the personal lives of the various characters in a show where I feel like the actual investigation is the more interesting thing. The mystery of what's going on is the more interesting thing. And it almost feels like a paint by numbers. It's fill in the blanks of the typical formula that you get for one of these shows. And obviously the formula for this type of show has been very successful in the past, which is why they keep doing it. But I am seeing through the cracks. So even though I don't think this is by any means bad, and I don't think that it's the worst example of any of these things that I'm saying, although there's a couple of sillier elements. I think, much like season 1 of True Detective, I do think the two leads are good. So that's a plus. I think they're both solid actors. They have very combative characters who clearly don't like each other, and they have different ideals. There seems to be some racial tension. Those things are kind of interesting. And obviously both actors are good, so I think that stuff's working well enough and carries a lot of the smaller scenes that I do find a little bit more tedious in this episode. But I will, I was finding myself kind of bored at certain points. I was finding myself not being that captivated by a lot of the other stuff going on. And I think there's a balance to be had between the personal drama of the characters and the actual plot that we're there for. I think you have to sort of mix them together a lot more. You have to bounce back between them a lot more, as opposed to feeling like the middle of the episode was a big sort of gaping hole where all the interesting stuff was just kind of being ignored for the most part. And this is the sort of thing that it might get better after episode 1. Maybe you could argue episode 1 has to introduce all these elements, so you spend all this time. The problem is with that, though, is I've said that and made that excuse for so many first episodes of this type of show, only to find that it just gets worse because they're still focusing on all the less interesting elements as we go through the show. And this is only 6 episodes, so they don't have a whole lot of time here. I would hope that means that the rest of the episodes are more focused. We'll see, I guess. I mean, maybe I'll see, maybe I don't. I actually don't know if I want to watch the next one. Like, I'm actually conflicted. It kind of just depends if I have time for it next week, or if I have to if I have to put extra effort into making room for it, it'll probably not happen because I don't think I'm that passionately dedicated to it. Actually, one other sort of broad complaint I would give this episode is I think the music is very overbearing, and I don't mean the score. I think the score's fine. Whenever there's an orchestral score that's been written for the episode, I think it's solid enough. It's doing emotional little beats. It's fine. I'm talking about the songs, the sourced music, the popular tracks. Every single time one of those started playing, it felt like it was just doing a cliche, and it was overbearing and didn't fit the tone of the show. It was maybe going for a kind of ironic thing where the song sounded, I don't know. Actually, the worst of it was the opening titles. I don't know what the song is for the opening titles. I don't recognize it. I don't really keep up with popular music, but it completely just hit wrong. As soon as it cut to the opening titles, the tone felt wrong. Frankly, the opening titles felt cut too quick. Everything about it just felt off. It felt like, oh, you're not giving me the vibe that the show feels like it wants to be giving me. I thought it was a complete misfire. But I do generally think throughout the episode that every time a song started playing, it was overbearing. So, it's not the biggest problem in the world, but it is something that I think is worth mentioning before I get to any kind of more spoilery stuff. I'm not going to go play-by-play for this one. Also, I'll say spoilers for the episode and then just talk about some of the key things that I think I want to talk about. I think one of the things that people are really going to get into and talk about with this, because like I said, I really enjoyed the first 10 minutes of seeing this research base, seeing them interact a little bit, and then the tease that something creepy is happening, which is this one guy shaking, turning around, and we see the tongue eventually when the delivery guy comes and there's no one there, and we see how eerie it is because it's abandoned and all the rest of it. Where did these guys go? Right, all that stuff, interesting. And they look into what this company is that does this. They talk about it a little bit. The big thing, of course, is that there's a tongue there that probably belongs to a native woman, mainly because there's markings on the tongue that are consistent with something that was it something about nets, something to do with nets that sort of leaves marks on the tongue, but they could sort of tell it was, or at least Jodie Foster's character was pretty sure of it. So, and it shows you that she's capable. She sort of spots things that say that the guys have been going for at least 48 hours, when John Hawk's characters say, they might just be out doing some sciencey stuff. They might be back soon. And Jodie Foster kind of explains, no, the mayonnaise in this sandwich has been like this for 2 days. This is we're 48 hours late to the party. So it shows you that she's observant, that she's able to deduce things in a way that he either can or is just unwilling to put in the effort to. It feels like he's kind of sloppy, or like I say, maybe he's actually trying to obstruct the investigation for whatever reason. But anyway, for the most part, the episode doesn't really talk too much about this side of things. Eventually, really late in the episode, Navarro shows up here looking for any evidence to link it to the murder that she's trying to prove. Jodie Foster's character Danvers runs into her because she's there looking for evidence as well, because she was looking at the case files of the murder, and one of the guys had what might be the same coat that the murder victim from before used to wear, but it also, you know, they make more than one of each coat, so it's also fair that it could just be a coincidence. But the only thing throughout the episode that ends up leading to a big thing at the end for your big final creepy shot to cut to credits on, is that there's this character played by Fiona Shaw who's out cutting up a wolf, or maybe it wasn't a wolf. I can't remember what the animal was, but she was cutting up an animal that had been captured. And she sees what I can only describe as a ghost of a man standing there on his bare feet in the snow. And we come back to her a few times in the episode, and every time she sees him out there, she eventually gets her coat on and goes out and follows him. He never speaks. He just walks in the snow. We find out later that this guy she says it was has been dead for whatever amount of time, and she seems to know that, so she knows she was following some kind of ghost or spirit, and that leads them to the frozen bodies of at least some of the scientists in the snow. They've found them out in the wilderness somewhere, and that's your big dramatic end of the episode, is the shot of all the bodies. And it is a fine shot, and I like the mystery and the setup of the first 10-15 minutes, like I said. The actual following the ghost, though, I think mileage will vary for most people on how much they enjoy that. I don't mind it doing more supernaturally things, but it felt a little bit kind of dull in the way it did it to me. It just kind of felt very by the numbers, the way that she's just seeing this creepy man standing there and then goes and follows him. Nothing about it felt very intriguing or whatever. I just immediately knew it was a ghost, and not in like a way where I was excited it was a ghost. I was just kind of like, I think she sees a ghost. Okay. And then when he does lead her to a location, before he points to where the dead bodies are, the ghost does like a interpretive dance. He starts dancing. And I think this is probably a moment where it'll turn off a reasonable number of people. Like, obviously some people might think this is intriguing, they might get into it. I think this is where a lot of people are going to see this dancing moment and go, yeah, this isn't for me. I'm not necessarily jumping off because of it. I don't really... If anything, if it does more crazy stuff like that, I might be more inclined to want to see how deeper this rabbit hole goes, just for the amusement of it, if not because I actually think it's good. But I can see it turning off a lot of people because it felt like a kind of a silly moment, all things considered. The actual moment itself, like, it wasn't... If I was to try and just objectively critique it based on my feelings in the moment, I guess what I would say is that I wasn't intrigued as he was dancing. I was kind of, you know, tilting my head and going, really? That's what we're doing? Okay. If that's not the reaction that I think they want out of people, I imagine. So I think fundamentally, I do think the moment falls flat. And if it was trying to create intrigue for the audience, it certainly didn't create intrigue for me. It felt like just, we're trying to be mysterious for mysterious sake. Similarly, there's a scene where Navarro, and I almost forgot about this, it's when one of the overbearing pop songs is playing to try and create mood when she's driving around. But there's a polar bear with an injured eye in the street, just walking in the street. I actually Googled as soon as I saw this, are polar bears in Alaska? Because I wasn't sure. And it turns out polar bears are in parts of Alaska, not a lot of it, judging from the image I saw of a map on Google. But there are some polar bears in Alaska, so it's not like completely, you know, it's not the tropical island from Lost with a polar bear, is what I'm saying. They're not going into that kind of territory, but it did kind of feel like a spiritual moment. It does feel like they're going for some sort of existential kind of vibes. The characters do bring up religion. Navarro does mention she believes in God. She does bring up her past in the military and why she believes in God. And you see like a quick shot of her talking to someone who's missing half their head, but they're still talking somehow. They're still whispering in her ear. Whether that's literally what happened or sort of her interpretation of something that happened, I'm not really sure. But it's clear that Jodie Foster's character Danvers is kind of the establishment person, but is also the cynical one who kind of believes they'll never solve certain cases and doesn't believe in anything spiritual. Whereas Navarro clearly does believe in God and does believe in justice, and they specifically set up that she really has a problem with violence against women. Like, we see her taking down a husband who's angry at a wife who left him, an abusive husband, and she takes him down early in the episode. It's kind of her introduction scene. We see her sort of deal with this case, and we see that she's capable, she can take care of herself, she sort of, pins the guy down quite easily, that kind of thing. So yeah, that stuff's solid. Like, all the introduction stuff I think is really good. If anything, I might have been undershooting it when I said the first 10 minutes. Like, I think maybe the first 20 minutes is really solid, and then it kind of sort of grinds down into generic HBO cop show stuff. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I really want to talk about, because there's a lot of other things that happen in the episode. There's like a drunk driver who apparently regularly gets arrested that Jodie Foster arrests at one point. Jodie Foster's got an adopted daughter. I think she's adopted. The implication is that she took this girl in for her father that she knew, based on a line of dialogue later. We have John Hawkes' character, Peter, funnily enough. No, the son's Peter. John Hawkes is Hank. They're Hank Pryor and Peter Pryor. They set up they've got a bit of maybe a slightly strained relationship. John Hawkes apparently has a wife moving from another country, he's engaged to a woman from another country, and she's coming to live with him soon. They bring that up a bunch of times. We meet Peter, the son's wife, and his child, and we see that his work is getting in the way of their love life, and the wife's mad about that. So, there's a lot of these other things around there. Navarro, I think it's her sister who calls the police thinking there's someone next door. It seems like she may have a drug problem or something, or maybe not a drug problem. She might just have mental health issues. I'm not really sure. I don't think they ever really went into the specifics of it, but it seems like she has these outbursts where she gets paranoid. So I wasn't sure if it was a mental issue or a substance issue, but either way, she's got a sister she's sort of trying to look out for and take care of. So we set up all these sort of ancillary characters, and I think maybe they tried to put in too many in the first episode, if they're even all important in the long run, which I can't really say until the show is played out. I'm skeptical, I'll say. And then on top of that, you've got Navarro's kind of toy boy that she has. So yeah, a lot of ancillary characters, and we spend a lot of the middle of the episode setting all those characters up, and I found that a little bit tiring. Like, the direction was really strong at the start when it was actually showing us things, and it was giving us some atmosphere, and it was like, oh, they were all here, now they're not, and the Ferris Bueller DVD keeps playing on a loop, annoyingly. Why it kept playing that particular part of the movie on a loop where he's singing the song, I'm not entirely sure. Also, I will say this, the movie was clearly superimposed onto the screen. It wasn't playing in when they shot the scene, and it kind of has that look where it's just sort of put on top, which, a lot of things do that. I'm not really complaining about that so much. I will say though, it's heavily implied that this is a DVD they're watching and not a Blu-ray or a 4K or anything like that, and the quality looked far too good for a DVD. Anyone who actually pays attention and cares about image quality would be like, no, they're watching something that's at least HD on this based on what we see whenever it cuts to it. But then it's clearly just a DVD player, and all the DVDs they've got imply that everything's a DVD. Although they had quite the collection here at this research base. I noticed all 5 seasons of Babylon 5 on that shelf. I also noticed a few seasons of Smallville, which, less so. It was just, again, it's not important. It's just a little detail that stuck out to me that I wanted to be a nerd about for a second. Anyway, yeah, I think that's all I've got to say at this point. I think my biggest concern about possibly covering more of this season is how much of the show is going to be just all of the ancillary character drama, and how little I think I'm going to have to say anything about it. Because I didn't find a lot of it particularly compelling in this episode. The 2 leads are good. I think there's some nice direction here or there, and I like the setting, for sure. But some of the supernaturally stuff does come off a bit silly in this episode, and by the time we got back round to be like, oh yeah, remember what the show is actually about, this mystery about these scientists disappearing, I felt like we could have been focused on that a bit more throughout the episode. It felt like we just kind of, we introduced it and then we just sort of, okay, we're going to go do generic HBO character setup for 40 minutes and then we'll come back to this right at the very end. And I found that kind of frustrating. And I'll admit, I am being a little jaded here because I feel like I've seen a lot of shows from cable that kind of follow this type of formula. And yeah, I'm not over the moon with it. I would describe it as fine right now. Potential to get better, potential to get worse. Hard to say right now, but it didn't blow me away, certainly. So, let me know what you thought of the first episode of True Detective Night Country in the comments. Obviously, there's a bunch of details and stuff that I didn't really talk about, but I don't have much to say about a lot of the other things, honestly. So, yeah. You could support all this stuff by hitting the like button. Helps out a ton. It's free. It's easy to do. Smash the button. I hate saying that. I feel like a shill, but go do it. And of course, you can support us more so by going over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and getting some bonuses for your trouble. But that is me. Thank you very much for joining. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?